Team that helps business owners earn more and keep more.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, man. The SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by Rick's Pro Truck, #1 Jeep truck accessory stores in Mississippi. Spray and bed liners, lift kits, tires, and wheels. All at RPT, Rick's Pro Truck. 3 locations in the Jackson metro area. The newest, of course, Gluckstadt, Madison County. ricksprotruck.com. Welcome in. Good morning. We're streaming live on the Out of Bounds radio app, thezone1059.com. You can watch the show on YouTube. Search Out of Bounds Sports. Our guests join us on the Shinerbach guest line. We welcome in Steve Palazzolo, Pro Football Focus, PFF, NFL, and College Football Draft Insider, Steve Palazzolo. Steve, we were talking minor league baseball earlier. Blake and I were at the Mississippi Braves ballpark last night. They're the AA affiliate for the Atlanta Braves, and we were watching Mississippi State and Southern Miss play baseball. And then all of a sudden, that took us to great minor league baseball names. Blake, what's the new one that you mentioned? Was it the Trash Pandas?
Yeah, the Rocket City Trash Pandas.
Yeah, the Rocket City Trash Pandas, which is awesome. Do you have a favorite mascot? Since you made it to AAA with the San Francisco Giants, do you have a favorite minor league mascot?
Oh, man, I think first off, I think that stadium was the beginning of the end of my career. I gave up some runs in that stadium down there as a visiting player.
Did you really?
I did, yeah. I was in AA with the Mariners in 2010. I was in AAA, got sent down for about 3 weeks, got lit up, and then got released.
Oh,
and that was part of it. Yeah, it was bad. Bad times.
Okay, we're going to have to make your Mississippi experience better when you come down here. And I'm not kidding around about that. But when you come down here and enjoy all the food and cool stuff that we do. Deal?
Yes, deal.
Okay,
Thank you.
Cool. Go ahead.
Yeah, I played in Jackson for like 3 weeks.
Wow.
It wasn't good. So I think the Richmond Squirrels were a good one. They were the AA team for the Giants right after I left. After we were in Connecticut, they moved to Richmond. And, the Trash Pandas, they're a good one. I think they are the new winners, though.
So as a minor league baseball player, and again, Palazzolo got all the way up to AAA. That means you're a heck of a baseball player. Did it crack y'all up, some of the promotions, depending on the night, whether you were at home or traveling during your time in Major League / minor league baseball?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of them were fun. I mean, look, we had fun with it. So many guys, it's your job and you're just so focused on what you're doing. But, yeah, the promotions were good. We had, Saved by the Bell night out in Fresno, which was great. We had Mr. Belding there hanging out with us and everything. So it was doing Saved by the Bell trivia with him in the dugout. I mean, it was great. So it was a lot of cool stuff throughout the years that definitely kept it loose.
Love it. Steve Palazzolo, PFF.com, Pro Football Focus on the Out of Bounds Show. So, Steve, we like bringing you on because Pro Football Focus is awesome, PFF.com, and basically Blake lives on your site. And y'all are smart, and it's cool, the approach that y'all, take to the game. We also bring in this dude who's totally weird and quirky but smart too, a guy named Dave Bartu out west. And he's all into analytics and has been forever in college football. And he dabbles in the NFL. But he's been doing NFL QBs for 10 years, and he's been really, really good because he doesn't buy into guys coming out of blue blood programs. He's all about guys who have to elevate the people around him. I know it sounds simple. But in 2016, he jumped on the show, and he said, Dak Prescott's in my top 3 because Dak has had to do more with less. Last year, he jumps on the show. He goes, the last thing I would do is draft Tua. He said, this is nothing personal. Just looking at what I'm looking at, I wouldn't do it. And we know about the starts thing, whether it was Bill Parcells who really came up with it or whatever. But people talk about how, hey, man, you really need a minimum of 26, 28, but we'd rather you be over north of 30 starts in the NFL, which Eli Manning and Dak Prescott both had, and they had successful careers. And he said, run from the Mitch Trubisky's. He said that right off the bat a few years ago, Steve. I mean, he said, no way, and you know what, would I draft Trubisky. Do you have a number? Do y'all have a number at Pro Football Focus that y'all like to see? as far as starts in college so that a guy has really had a chance to build a lot of reps and see a lot of different things?
No, so I think I've seen some of Dave's stuff. I think that's interesting. I think obviously there are you mentioned some of the hits and some of the misses when you do that. I think it depends. So there's definitely not a starts that we're looking at, right? But we are actually in the middle of doing some research on like quote unquote 1-year wonders, and probably gonna have an article on our website next week about that. So that would put a guy like Mitch Trubisky in that bucket, or Dwayne Haskins, but also Kyler Murray was really a 1-year wonder. Even though he was a highly touted recruit and all that stuff, he had one great year. So I think those things kind of work both ways too. You know, for every Trubisky that you avoid, did you miss on a Kyler Murray, right? I mean, there are elements that work both ways. I mean, Tom Brady, going back to 1999 or 2000, Tom Brady's from a blue blood program in Michigan, right? Obviously, he wasn't a first-round pick, and that was different. So I think some of that stuff works both ways, but I think the general concept is a good one, because you're talking about, how easy is it at Alabama and at LSU, and I still think Joe Burrow is going to be fine. I think he's going to be really successful in the NFL, but it's definitely Tua and Mac Jones, looking at them throw. We were on our podcast this day trying to say who in the history of college football has had better receivers than Alabama? Like, what's even just
nobody
an approximation, right? There's not even anything that close, like mid-2000s USC, early 2000s Miami, maybe, with some of their groups of playmakers, Ken Dorsey, just kind of spreading the ball around to all these playmakers. So, like, there's a few through the years, but nothing like Alabama with Tua and Mac Jones. So it absolutely clouds your projections. And I think what we've leaned more on is our actual grades, and not just our overall grades, but the pieces of it. So clean pocket grade and QBs who just avoid negatively graded throws when throwing down the field. Our grades when throwing the ball beyond the sticks. Those have been pretty stable from NFL to NFL seasons, but also college to NFL seasons. So we look at some of our granular grading components and found some pretty good stability when projecting players going forward in those departments.
Okay, interesting. Steve Palazzolo, NFL Insider, PFF.com. Great site on NFL and college football, pro football focus. He joins us on the Shinerbach guest line. All right, let's go with Mac Jones then. I mean, he started a few times the year before last, once Tua was injured at Mississippi State, and then he started last year. He's had the wind behind him. You mentioned the receivers, the line, just everything that you need to be successful. Would you be hesitant, or extremely cautious as you evaluate Mac Jones going into the NFL draft?
Yes, I'd be cautious, but I keep getting tugged back and forth here. I'm trying to not have too much recency bias. And I think there's two elements of recency bias that are working against Mac Jones. The first is the Josh Allens of the world. Over the last few years, the toolsy quarterbacks who were not necessarily the most productive college QBs have started to take really big steps forward. That's Josh Allen. Justin Herbert, I think, exceeded expectations last year. Even if you do want to go back to Patrick Mahomes, obviously he was prolific from a passing standpoint in college, but he had all of these kind of quirky things about his game that he needed to clean up, and he did. And it was kind of like the arm talent ruled the day, right? And it's not clean across the board. I think Drew Lock is one of those arm talent type of guys who just hasn't really developed. So it's not clean. But we went through years of Blaine Gabbert, Jake Locker, Josh Freeman, these big armed QBs who just never really succeeded at the NFL level. And it was like, hey, don't draft arm strength. And now recently it's like those guys have been working out. So is that just like a trend, or is it just a coincidence? So Mac Jones is the opposite of that, right? He's not the big-armed guy. He's just the efficient, spread the ball around, hit the open receivers guy. He's got a million open receivers to, execute, so obviously he's going to look good. So I think people are leaning toward the Trey Lances of the world in this draft, the guys with upside, quote-unquote, and not so much the Mac Joneses. The other thing working against him is Tua, right, is the fact that Tua just came out of playing with these same receivers and didn't really look great as a rookie. So I think those two things are working against Mac Jones. Now, the things that are working for him are the fact that Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith are coming out saying, yeah, we prefer Mac Jones to Tua. Right? And nobody was questioning Tua as a prospect last year at this time that much, except maybe Dave. not too many people were questioning him. They were questioning, maybe his arm's not great or this isn't great, but they expected him to be a pretty good NFL quarterback. So I think you learn a little bit when you talk to receivers and say, hey, Mac's my guy. Mac, he's accurate and he's on time, and those are still the most important things with quarterback: timing and accuracy and pocket presence, right? But I think in recent NFL history, we've seen the guys who do stuff outside the pocket, which Mac Jones doesn't. The guys that have big arms to get the ball down the field, which Mac Jones doesn't really have. We've seen those guys have success, and those are the things that kind of give me pause. And I just don't know if it's recency bias or more of a trend in the NFL.
Okay.
How's that for an answer?
Well,
did I hedge enough?
No, you did, but it was a good answer too. Steve Palazzolo on the Shinerbot guest line. Okay, with Tua, there's word coming out now that he's passive, and that's okay. It doesn't mean he's a bad dude or whatever. Some guys are alphas. Some guys can get the locker room and have that presence in the huddle and just so on. He threw the walk-off as a true freshman, Steve. Plus, he had already come in all hyped as a 5-star out of Hawaii to the biggest, baddest college football program in the country. So all of that and then really, Steve, post that, what'd he do? I mean, I just, and then he has two. All right, you tell me. He had 2 games where he threw for under 100 yards with the Dolphins this past year. They benched him twice. Is that more? And I think Flores looks to be very talented. But is that more a conservative, defensive-minded coach that's just trying to grind through this and make the playoffs? Is it on Tua? Is it their skill talent's not good enough? What did you make of that, Steve?
So my podcast partner, Sam Monson, makes a really good point in describing this, right? He always tells the old story about Peyton Manning, and I forget who the coach was early in his career, saying
Jim Morris Sr.?
Coach telling Peyton. No, I mean, it might have been Tom Moore.
Okay, gotcha.
It might have been Bruce Arians, actually, saying, Peyton, throw the ball. And Peyton's like, no, the guy's not open. And he's like, no, that's NFL open, Peyton. You throw NFL open. That's like half a step, or maybe even not a step, right? So what Tua and Mac Jones are dealing with at Alabama is wide open. I mean, behind the defense, too. Guys having 4 steps behind the defense pretty consistently. So I think the ability to see open receivers is going to be a bit of a process for guys like Tua and guys like Mac Jones, right? You have to be able to anticipate. You have to be able to say, this window is really tight, but that's open in the NFL. And I think that's part of the struggle with Tua and what happened early with the Dolphins, because I think A/B analysis is interesting, right? Like when Tua is on the field, here's what happened. But when Ryan Fitzpatrick was on the field, something different happened. What was different? All of a sudden, he was just chucking it down the field saying, hey, Mike Gesicki, you're a big tight end. Go get the ball. Hey, Devontae Parker, you're my big-bodied receiver. Go get the ball. Fitzpatrick was more aggressive. He understands NFL open or even NFL covered, but still give my guy an opportunity to play. So that's either not in Tua's nature, or it's just going to take a little bit of time. So I'm not ready to say he's not aggressive enough, he's not this, he's not that.
Okay.
I think he has to get used to a little bit of like, hey, this is one that's open, you got to throw it. It's the NFL. I also think Tua doesn't have the best skill set, the best arm, but much like Ryan Fitzpatrick. So he's going to have to be early and quick, and I think he does work quick through his progressions, but I think that will even speed up even more as you go. So I think Tua just needs a little bit of time because he's coming from something that was so easy in college. The NFL might be a bit more of a transition for him.
Okay. And so he was overdrafted, but he could work out. I mean, look, Drew Brees was an anomaly, an outlier. 6 foot tall, 200 pounds, wildly successful Hall of Famer. Now, I know you mentioned Kyler, so he may be, but he's not going to be Drew, but he's a different deal, and he may be able to play for years and be good. Yep. But for the most part, Steve, the last 20 years, even 30 years, we haven't seen a guy of that stature go 15 years plus like Brees and play deep into the playoffs many a times and win a Lombardi trophy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think less than the stature. I was surprised at how small Tua looked at the NFL level. Just looked small. And I'm not talking about just stature. I'm talking about the arm as well. I don't want. I'm not trashing his arm. I just don't. I just think Marcus Mariota is kind of similar. I didn't think Mariota had the best pure velocity, but he had a good quick release. I've compared Tua to Jimmy Garoppolo. I think there are elements with all those guys. Like if Tua becomes Jimmy Garoppolo, I wouldn't be all that surprised. Now, is that an unexciting proposition for the number 3 overall pick? Perhaps, right? Because Jimmy Garoppolo is the type of guy who, one year he's going to bring it to a Super Bowl. Another year, it's like, maybe the Niners want to move on. I mean, that, again, mid-tier. I finally said mid-tier quarterback here on the show this week. But that's the nature of the mid-tier quarterback. You know, the Derek Carrs. 1 week, this is our guy. The next week, oh, boy, we need to move on. Tua might end up being that guy, and I think he could become that guy. But, yeah, like anytime you're trying to compare somebody to a Brees who is at a ridiculous different level of accuracy and decision-making and, speed of decisions, it's always going to be a difficult comparison, and Tua is absolutely not at that level yet, for sure.
Okay, Steve Palazzolo. Follow him on Twitter at PFF_Steve. He's the host of PFF NFL Podcast. You can get it everywhere, but most people go to Apple Podcasts. He joins us on the Shinerbach guest line. I know it's still early, but just give me a number, give or take, of how many QBs you expect to be drafted in the first round, and what are the odds of how many being a bust?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably those 5, right, that are going to be, Lawrence, Wilson, Trey Lance, Mack, and who am I forgetting? Right? Oh, Justin Fields. I am expecting those 5 to go.
Okay.
Historically, just look at the 2018 draft is probably a good proxy for that. I think people are feeling pretty good about Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, and Lamar Jackson right now. Not so good about Sam Darnold or Josh Rosen. So I think you might see something similar. Where it's 3 out of 5 work out. I would like to see the NFL have patience with guys. Or like if the Falcons at number 4 drafted Justin Fields, I think he would be a great fit for Arthur Smith's system over there, but sit behind Matt Ryan for a year or two. I would love to see teams actually let guys sit and develop a little bit more and not have to just force them in. And I know it feels like you have to do it, but I would love to see more of that. And I think that would help the success rate just a little bit if a guy like Justin Fields or a team like the Lions who are in full rebuild mode, or the Panthers had some patience with like a Trey Lance or Justin Fields, whoever it might be. I would love to see those guys sit for a little bit and develop and just see what happens there. I think those 2 guys are the primary candidates to do that. And I think that would help the hit rate just a little bit. But I'll say 5 QBs drafted and 3 out of 5 we feel pretty good about.
Okay. What about – so I think it was the book QB by Bruce Feldman, and Trent Dilfer was in it, and he had run the numbers on quarterbacks from 1983 on and the way they were built. And, they kind of needed to be Elway, Manning, Eli, Dak, Brady. I mean, you need to be big, especially hips down. Russell Wilson is well built from the hip, that type deal. Do you buy in any of that, or you think the game's different now and you're not into that?
I don't completely buy into that. I like Trent. I've worked with Trent at Elite 11 and everything. He's great. I don't necessarily buy into it. I think there's just bias in that sample in general because, the NFL thought like that since 1983. So they really only drafted guys who looked like that. So the most successful quarterbacks obviously looked like that. I think Baker Mayfield's going to have a perfectly fine career. I think Kyler Murray's going to have a perfectly fine career. Brees, you could call him the outlier. Absolutely. That's fine. But I mean, I think Kirk Cousins doesn't have that type of body, and he's going to have a perfectly fine career. He's pretty slight by NFL QB standards. So I think I don't know that it necessarily matters. You just want guys who could do the important QB stuff. And I think that's, hitting open throws and having pocket presence, being accurate, making good decisions. That's always going to be the most important thing.
There's still these – let's kind of switch gears here. Well, okay, Mac Jones real quick. Out of the 5 guys that are going to go in the first round quarterbacks, where do you have Mac Jones ranked?
Yeah, so PFF as a whole, we have him at number 5. I think – it's funny because we have our site rankings. We all kind of work on that a little bit together. But I think if you just run the numbers, you might have Mac Jones at 3. and have him a little bit higher, more like Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and then Mac kind of competing with Justin Fields, and then Trey Lance because of small data set and small sample sizes, more of a great unknown, right? So I don't know. I feel like I'm talking myself into Mac Jones. Go back and forth on it, Bo. I'm back and forth on Mac, but right now we have a number 5 in our QB rankings.
All right. We've had some Cowboys insiders on, and they say that the Dak for Russell thing is nonsense. It's not going to be done. From the numbers to the fact that they would have to sign Dak, and Dak wouldn't agree to it because after they sign him, he would have the power to say yay or nay.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect any of that to happen. I think, just talking about Russell Wilson for a minute, Russ's best situation is in Seattle. Like if Russ had the opportunity to go to any of the 5 teams that he said he might want to get traded to, Cowboys being one of them, Cowboys, Raiders, Bears, and Saints. What's the best situation? It's in Seattle. He's already got DK up there. He's got Tyler Lockett. Like, get him another receiver. Yes, get him some offensive line help. But he would be in Seattle without Seattle having to trade for him either, right? Like, if the Saints somehow pulled that off and got Russ in the building and traded for him, they wouldn't be able to get him a good player for another 2 years between salary cap and draft capital they'd have to give up. The Bears, the Raiders, all those teams would have to give up so much in the draft. It's like Russ would be asking to go play for the Texans, a team that's been depleted from a talent standpoint. It's like he's asking to go into Deshaun Watson's situation that Watson's trying to run from. So Russ's best situation is in Seattle. I can't imagine he's going to get moved. I think they'll figure it out. And I agree with who you had on that, the rumors with that just don't make a ton of sense either.
Blake, do you have something? We've only got 2 minutes.
Well, yeah, real quick.
Unfortunately, this flew by.
Yeah, we can't like super dive into it, and I know it's not quarterbacks, but we've been having this argument about Urban Meyer and about whether or not he'll be successful in Jacksonville, and like how long can he be unsuccessful and still maintain, his health or whatever fake reason he quit last time. Do you see Trevor Lawrence being more Steve Spurrier or Jimmy Johnson?
I think Urban, he's interesting because he's such a good recruiter, and that's not anything. You don't do that in the NFL, right? Like, that's a big part of his success. But I think if he plays CEO, right, which again is what a college coach has to do. They bring players in, they develop them, but they play CEO. I think if Urban does that and he surrounds himself with good people, he'll be okay. He's not going to come in and torch the league with like special X's and O's or anything like that. I don't know that that's necessarily his thing. But I think just like having Dan Mullen as his offensive coordinator at Florida, those types of things, having good people. So I think he'll have success. I think Trevor Lawrence helps that baseline of success. I think he'll be okay. CEO, Urban Meyer.
I can't wait to see how this shakes out in Jacksonville over the next few years. Steve Palazzolo, host of PFF NFL Podcast on Apple Podcast. Follow him on Twitter at PFF_Steve. Steve Palazzolo, have a good weekend, buddy. We'll talk next week.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
See you, man. He joined us on the Shiner Bach guest line. Enjoy a Shiner Bach with your ribs, maybe a little steak or pork tenderloin this weekend. Beautiful weather. Blake, it's time to get out on the golf course. Live Oaks Golf Club, the Philly cheesesteak sandwich, the cheeseburger and the wings, all at Roosevelt's at Live Oaks. Open Tuesday through Sunday for lunch. Roosevelt's at Live Oaks Golf Club.